So let us speak about building vocational identity. A few years ago, I was in a seminary. I knew some of the people, and one of the superiors began a talk speaking. It was like the motto of that talk about the identity of those seminarians, and he began saying, because your identity is service, because your identity is piety, because your identity is a close relationship with God, and so on. Your identity is the will of evangelizing. It was very beautiful, but as he was speaking, I said, is it really their identity, or is it the identity that you think that they should have? The question is important, because if you take for granted that they have the identity, you are saving them the work of building the identity. Identity in any kind of issue that we think is not something that you receive, even sexual identity. Last year, more or less for this month, I was speaking to one of my students. He wanted to do his work for his STE about sexual identity, and he told me, I'm going to speak about sexual identity as something that you receive. And I said, you can do it, but not with me. If you want to do with me, you have to do your thesis about how you build your identity, not as you receive it specifically. Counting on so many personal biographical issues that you have received, so it is not something that you create ex nihilo. It is something that you receive a lot of things, but then you have to integrate them, you have to put a hierarchy, you have to put them in order, and then you will have your personal identity absolutely different from any other people. Attention with your identity is, because it means that all the 40 seminarians who were there in that room should have exactly the same identity, and obviously that is not real. I speak about identity, and I like very much speaking about that, because it is a topic in which we can connect theology or Christian formation and psychology, because identity is not a theological concept. If you go to the Bible, and you, in a digital Bible, and you look for the word identity, you will see that it does not appear in the Bible. If you go to Second Vatican Council and you do a search for the word identity, you will find that it does not appear in any document. You see, what happened? It happened that the Second Vatican Council began in 1962, 1965, and the psychologists who have developed the concept of identity were there working from the 50s and 60s, mostly in the United States. That is the humanistic psychology. Gordon Allport, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, and so on. And I think, I have not done a great research about that the church found that this concept, psychological concept, how a person has that subjective concept of identity, can be used also mainly for vocation. If you go to Pastoreta Bogovis and you go to the new Ratio 2016, the word identity appears a lot. But we have to know that it is something that if you go to Trent, it does not appear, and there is another scheme completely different. So we can ask ourselves, what is identity? What is identity to begin with, and then we will speak now in general, in psychology, and then we will speak about identity, priesthood identity. So we can say that identity is something that answers the question, who am I, or what am I? It is like an axis, X, Y, Z, in which you can put yourself in a very unique way. have something in common with you, who are also priests, but surely not all of us that we know is equal. Because my identity is built by a lot of issues, a lot of pieces. I am Spanish, I am priest, I am 50 years old, I come from a family, I support a soccer team, and that is also a part of my identity. And what does it is not a chaotic mix of things. It is supposed that as long as you mature, you build a hierarchy in all those things. And in our case, at the top of that hierarchy is the fact that we are priests. And we put in order all those things so that the other things become secondary and are not cancelled. And this is a very important topic that some people do not understand. When they say, I am priest and I am only priest, that can be correct, I can share that, whenever you also accept that you have a lot of aspects that do not have to see with the fact that you are a priest. Otherwise, if you say, as I'm a priest, I have to renounce to my natural family, to my football team, to my hobbies, to the fact that I like listening to music, not only religious music, the fact that I like to play the guitar, or I like to do a sport, and so. Some people perhaps taken by a excessive or not well thought still have renounced to all those things. The result has been that the priesthood vocation has made their personality poorer, more poor, instead of enriching the personality. And obviously it is a problem that can manifest mainly when they are tired, when they are on holidays, when they have a free day, and they say, I don't know how to rest. The only way you have to rest is working more. And then they become exhausted. And then they lose the possibility of having nice relationships with other people. One of the psychologists that has spoken about identity is this Gordon Allport. He's a classic in personality psychology, and he has spoken about 6 characteristics of a mature personality that can work also for the judgment, for example, for priesthood. When you have to check in the seminarians. These 6 characteristics are the extension of the sense of self. A child is necessarily self-centered, which does not mean that he's egoistic. It means that he only thinks on him. When you are in a party with 6-year-old kids and you put a cake, all of them will go on the cake and try and take the biggest piece, even if in that case there won't be cake for them. Are they egoistic? No, it is normal. They psychologically have not the capacity of thinking on the others. Little by little, by education, mainly by education in a family, they will realize that I have to share things. Not only because then other people will share with me, because it is the fair thing to do. But you have to do it during childhood and mainly adolescence. Allport says that all these characteristics are dramatically increased in adolescence, and at the end of adolescence, the person must have them relatively built, and then they will have obviously to grow during the rest of their lives. The second characteristic is an emotional relationship with others, not to be centered in myself, but also to be able to have relationships with the other people. The third one is emotional security, that is the capacity to control the reactions, the instincts, and not not to be taken by the primo primi, but to manage himself and his feelings and so. Also here enters the capacity of delaying gratification. Fourth, realistic perception, which is the capacity to judge the world from an objective point of view and not only depending on my mood, depending on my interest. Five is self-objectivation, the capacity to judge myself with objectivity. And finally, I'm going to stop a little bit in it, is the unifying philosophy. According to Alport, at the end of adolescence, people must have a kind of goal for his life as a whole. That obviously has to see with vocation. And we have the experience, perhaps even in ourselves, that at the end of adolescence, if we didn't have clear our vocation, at least we knew what we wanted to do from a professional point of view, but also for the life as a whole.
Sir, what is the modern sense of when the end of adolescence is? Oftentimes we think of adolescence with just the teen years, but I think there's probably evidence saying that it extends
next
beyond.
question. It is very pertinent because we are going to speak about the life cycle.
Okay.
Now, the life cycle has, all the stages have delayed about 10 years more or less. Because when Alport and Erickson and all the psychologists that we're going to mention were working, the normal thing is that if you go to high school, just after that, most of the people began to work. And so in a couple of years, they were able to get married. So the normal thing in society is getting married when you were 20. So you had your children about 4 years, and then became the crisis of the middle age. By 50s, 60s, you have the empty nest syndrome. Now many families say, I wish my nest was empty when I am 50. My children are still here because they are not married. So all the life cycle and its crisis has gone 5-10 years after. In the case of adolescence, from a physiological point of view, it should be finished by 17, 19 years old. But from a psychological point of view, it has been delayed because children now do not have so many responsibilities as they used to be. And the society of welfare does show that people are not able to really put their talents to work because they receive so much that the parents do not need to put them into their responsibilities. And from a social point of view, you in the practice remain as an adolescent until you arrive to 25 years old, dependent economically on your parents until you have a new job in which you can be settled in your life and then begin to think about marriage.
Thank you.
So this sex characteristic that we have said that is an unifying psychology, he calls it as the end or ends for which the person has chosen to live. It is something voluntary that you do willingly. That directs your actions and gives meanings to the world existence. I like it very much because it has to see with our priesthood vocation. It is something that you have chosen, that directs your actions, what you do, but also what you don't do, what you renounce. When you say, I would like to go to this place, to this disco, I like the dancing, but I know that me as a priest, it is not a good place to be. So I renounce to this place, but I don't renounce to the fact that I like music, that I like feast, and so I will have to live that in another way, integrated in the hierarchy that gives my vocation. And it gives meaning to my world existence, to my sacrifice, to my joys. So he speaks about 3 possible goals and calls it comprehensibility schemes. That would be the theoretical, the one who is a lab rat, who likes to do research or to study. Many academic people are like this. The utilitarian, the one who seeks only the useful, manual example. The aesthetic, the poet, the artist that looks for harmony, for beauty. The social, who lives for love, that would be the philanthropic, the person who works on an NGO. The political, who wants to serve the other people. Now he says he wants power, he wants the other people to do what they want. And finally, the religious, that the one who looks for unity with something that is transcendent, something that is bigger and goes farther from him. He says that if you know what is your comprehensibility scheme, it gives you directivity, it helps you to cut some of the branches going out of what you want to do, and it helps also for the consistency assessment. It is not consistent that if you say that you want to be a priest, as example, in case of seminarians, that you are not available when we, in the seminary, ask for a volunteer to do a service for other people, for do a pastoral, and so there is something that does not work. And it is not that you have to do that you have to present volunteer yourself. It means that if you don't do it willingly, it will be very hard for you to be a good priest. So you have to, not to do simply. There is the easy thing, to act. You have to do an inner work so as to be happy, serving and offering you as a volunteer. A second psychology is Erik Erikson, who says that identity is the sum of inner sameness. That is, the fact that we are the same along all the life cycle. I am the same as this child, adolescent, young adult, the same as the old man that I will be in a few years, even if I feel very different from him. But I take with me all the richness, also all the wounds, as we spoke yesterday, that I have carried in my life. And I know that many times my virtues, my talents, all of them have a kind of dark side. The one who is very extroverted, because he has grown in a very open house and he has the possibility, has more possibility of being proactive, or have a lot of friends, but also he will be probably more impulsive, he will commit errors of precipitation, so he has to control those errors without renouncing to the talents that he has. At the same time, the one who is very introverted will have usually less social skills, but he will be more reflective and he won't commit so many errors of precipitation. So attention with the people that say that I don't like how I am because I have these problems with my personality or with my biography, because you cannot renounce to you. First, because it is impossible. Second, because if you want to renounce to your dark side, you will also renounce to your talents. And the second characteristic that Erikson says for what identity is the continuity of one's own meaning for the others. That is, identity is not only something subjective, it is something that can be assessed or checked from the outside. So you can also ask yourself, how do other people see me? How do they consider me as a priest, as a person who is available? And so if they don't consider me as a priest according to the model, then we have to see if the model of a priest is correct or not. But if they say you don't look like a priest because you are very, be attentive, because perhaps you have to improve a little more your personal identity. A third psychologist, in which I am going to work more in this first part of the presentation, is this Canadian, well, it's Canadian, so we are not going to speak only about American psychologists, who is still alive, and his name is James Marshall. He's already a little old and retired. He was born in 1937. So that he has worked a lot about vocational identity from the point of view of professional identity, but he calls it like that, vocational identity. That we can, mutatis mutandis, we can use his studies. So he says that identity is an internal, self-constructed, dynamic organization of impulses, capabilities, beliefs, and individual history. So as you see, he finds for professional identity, he works mainly when the person has to choose a grade to study, a career to study. He says that after that, you can see all his capabilities, his beliefs, even his history. You want to be a lawyer because your father was a lawyer many times, or you want to be a lawyer because your father was a doctor, and you are so tired of listening about illnesses and so in your heart that you want to go to the opposite extreme. In one way or the other, the environment in which you have grown has much to see with your vocation. Obviously, it does not condition absolutely your choice. You are always free, and obviously you are also led by the grace of God that can touch you and can change radically the choices that you did at the end of your adolescence. Nowadays, it is more and more frequent to find people who discover their vocation after start going to college or in college, so there are also important changes that can be a discontinuity with the story of the person. But anyway, the capabilities, the impulses, the dreams of the person usually are there in that vocation, in that conversion. So it is something self-constructed. As we have said, it is not something that one told me this is your identity. It is something that you have to build along your life, and it is dynamic. It is a structure, but it is not made of rock. It is like the skyscrapers. People who work at the top of a very high skyscraper say that they can feel that the building, when it is windy, moves. And he says sometimes it is like dizzying. And you say, but so the building is not secure because of that movement. But the architect says, no, it is necessary. If you have a rigid building so long, it would not be able to support the strength of the wind. It has to be flexible. Strong but flexible. And that is also personality, because or maturity or identity. It has to be able to adapt to the new circumstances and to be open to the new challenges that you will find along your life. And challenges are not the same when you are 20, when you are 30, or when you are 50. That's why he says that a well-developed identity structure, like a well-developed superego, is flexible. It is open to changes in society, to changes in relationships, to changes in yourself, because we don't have the same ambitions now when we are in our 40s, 50s, 60s than we were an adolescent or a 20-year-old man. But many of the challenges come in your relationships, when we have to deal with new problems, with new situations. So we have to be open to change. We cannot say ever that I have the maturity forever, that my identity is completely constructed. You will find more things that will enrich you. That will be, if you remember, one of the first slides was that room of the instruments for the person who takes care of the house. that is full of instruments. The more challenges you have, the more you can use all the instruments, or even say that these instruments are not enough. I need a new one. So you look here and there to say this is useful for me, and then it enriches your personality. The only thing that does not change is death matter. All that is alive always is in a continuous process of changing. This openness to change allows for numerous reorganizations of identity contents throughout the life of a person with an achieved identity, although the essential identity process remains the same. Do you remember that inner sameness? I am the same, but I get more or less or am more rich. And then the person becomes stronger with each crisis. Each crisis makes me to have more instruments if I am open to do that search for more instruments. And here we arrive to a key concept, a key word, which is crisis. Sometimes when we hear the word crisis, we think that, hey, attention, because it means that my vocation or my fidelity is in danger. It is not necessarily like that. The original Greek definition or sense of crisis is not challenging the lifestyle that I have or my vocation. The original sense of crisis is change. And in fact, crises are moments of change in which the previous way of thinking, feeling, or relating to other people or to act is no longer adaptive, and it becomes necessary to modify them or find new ones. The paradigm of crisis is adolescent crisis, when the person finds that he's not anymore a child, but he's not anymore an adult. He does not like to be treated as a child, but he does not know how to behave as an adult. So he feels very insecure. He has to challenge a lot of new problems, but he does not know, so he's a little defiant with parents. Don't treat me anymore as a child, or don't kiss me anymore, at least in front of my friends, because it is only for the kids. I want to do, but I don't know how. And then they become impulsive and so on. We will go back to adolescence. So, insists this Marcia, the more developed this structure is, the more aware individuals seem to be to their own uniqueness and similarity to others. So it is a balance. You are the only person with your identity. You are a unique person, but you are very similar to other people. And that is the combination that you have to acknowledge and that you have to live, as well as their own strengths and weaknesses in making their way in the world. That is also part of our identity, and that's why it is important that all of us know our weaknesses, and also the people. We are not only in this talk. I don't want to speak only how to improve our identity, but also how to help other people to build their identity. People in formation or seminarians, or people that we treat, mainly young people in the catechesis, but also people whose identity has to be marriage and has to build their identity in a shared life. About this identity, like strengths and weaknesses, Saint Josemaria used to say that when he was with married couples, do you love this one, your wife, your husband? Yes, I do. But do you like his weaknesses? Because if you don't like them, you don't like the person. Because the weaknesses are part of the identity. Even doing one more step, the natural family of the husband or the wife are also part of the identity. And I remember a psychologist from Italy says, When you marry a man or a woman, you are also marrying her family. It is not something that you have to bear like a burden. It is something that is part of the identity. So if you say, I don't like your family, you are telling your partner, I don't like a part of you. And it can be very hard for him, for her, and also for the living together. So the less developed that this structure is, that this identity is, the more confused individuals seem to be about their own uniqueness relative to others, and the more they have to rely on external sources to evaluate themselves. External sources. What do adolescents do first to construct their identity? Usually they say, I don't want to be anymore like you, my parents. I want to be unique. I want to be myself. So don't tell me anymore what I have to do. But also they look for external sources for identity, and then they go to actors, to sport people, to YouTubers, TikTokers, and so that they tell me what I want to be. That's why it is very important for families to check what are the sources of information of identity of their kids. It is very important that the families, mainly with young adolescents, know what are the TikTokers or influencers that their kids are following. It only works when they have followed their kids, their children, since they were kids, and there is trust. If you begin speaking about that when the child arrives to adolescence, by definition, an adolescent is close to that tentative of invasion by their parents. So you need to have done a big job previously. So continues this Marcia, identity contributes to intimacy. That sense of security in oneself is necessary to be able to risk the vulnerability inherent to the temporary fusion with the other. Yesterday, when we had the talk about the accompaniment to bounded people, we said that it is a necessary step to be healed of the biographical wounds, to accept the vulnerability. In fact, when you want to trust some person, you put yourself in a risk of being abused, in a risk that the person does not accomplish with your expectations, and then the easy thing, if you are very insecure, is to be closed. And here is a paradox. You say the paradox of intimacy is that it is a strength that can only be acquired through vulnerability. I can only share intimacy with someone when I do myself vulnerable. But I only can be really vulnerable and secure at the same time if I have an inner security and a firm identity. So it can be a vicious cycle for a person who has a chronic insecurity in her life. It will be very difficult for her to share real intimacy being also himself. He can share intimacy but become independent, and obviously it is a great problem for the life because it can also make her personality, her identity more poor, because if you are not being yourself in a relationship, and unfortunately we can find it in marriage life more frequently with women, that they trust so much the husband that take all the decisions for me, take all the responsibility of the house, and when they realize, they say, I as a person I'm like empty, because I have voluntarily, willingly, I have put in my husband, in my partner, all the responsibilities, and the more he takes from me. But that is also something that has to see with the vocation. There is a book that has become a trending topic about spiritual abuse, written by Dismas de Lassus, who is the prior of the Certos, do you say Certos? The Cartujos in France? Carthusians, yeah, in France, and he has written a book about risk in consecrated life, but it can also be applied for other kinds of spiritual accompaniment. He speaks about vulnerability. He says how trust makes you vulnerable, speaking in the concept of abuses, because if I go to a spiritual director, if I enter into an institution, if I enter a seminary, I take for granted that the person, who is my formator, my spiritual director, all the things that he will command me will be for my best. And I cancel, or at least I reduce my critical judgment of them. So I am vulnerable in case he asks me for something that is immoral or that is not for my life. So we find the problem. So what do we have to do? We have to foster distrust in these institutions? Obviously not, but we have also to foster a healthy critical sense, and also a sense that I am not going to act against my consciousness, even if somebody, a superior, is asking me for that. And that is really a healthy protection against abuses. If you think that something is wrong, don't do it, even if your superior, bishop, priest, father also is asking you to do that. Okay, so after this introduction, we can go to put all that general identity knowledge that we have seen to priestly spirituality. First of all, I am going to speak, as you have seen, in a psychological point of view. But remember that psychology is help for theology, at the same time, the same way that philosophy used to be said like the servant of theology. It does not mean that they don't have the consistency, but they are helpers. The important thing is the personal relationship with God. Pope Francis, in a speech to the congregation for the clergy, said, "Priests are called to grow in awareness of being pastors, sent to stand in the midst of their flock, to render the Lord present through Eucharist, and to dispense His mercy. This is what it means to be priests. It is not limited just to what priests do, not acting the priest, but being a priest. That means identity, with other words." I remember one in a talk similar to this, one of the attendants told me, one of my priest friends says, when I am out of my house, I am a priest. In my house, I am a person, a human person. And he asked me, what do you think about that? And I answered, obviously, the prima facie sense that you are meaning is wrong. He's also a priest inside his house, even if he's living alone and he's wearing a t-shirt and short pants. So he has to behave because he's in the presence of God, but not only because God is washing, because I am washing myself. And I know that I am a priest and I have to behave as a priest even if nobody is looking at me. But I told him, attention, because there is a second mistake that sometimes you don't realize, and this that he's a man when he's out his house, which means that he has his needs. He has that need that we have also spoken about, to love other people and to feel loved, and he needs to have friends. He needs to rest. He needs to take some time for himself. He needs to be with people, okay, but he also needs to be by himself, to pray, to know himself, to to stop all the music and stimuli and so. Otherwise, if he don't realize that he's a man, he can get burned out. He cannot realize that he's getting in love because he's a man and he's treating a lot of people also with some intimacy. I remember one of my students, it was very funny because he came to me, I was his spiritual director, he said, I don't know what happened to me because there is a lay girl in my class and I am getting like a little upset with her because I sometimes I realize that I am thinking on her in my prayer or when I'm working or in night that I'm dreaming. I'm looking for speaking to her. Everything is very clean, no, not against purity. But I am wondering why I am so obsessed with her. And I said, my friend, I am afraid that you are in love with her. I said, it is not possible because I want to be a priest. I have no doubt about that. But it's compatible. You are a man. You have met a nice girl, a beautiful girl, with your age, with your interest, with so many things in common. At the point that she is studying theology, and simply it is a normal thing. You have fallen in love with her. So what can I do? Just take it as a challenge, as a crisis of your vocation. Think what you do, what you want to do with your life, and if you think that your life is to become a priest, take some distance from her. Protect your heart. Try not to share so much intimacy with her, because you have so many things in common. She's a good Christian, good age, and so that is a good ground for love. So take distance. I recommended him be prudent not to speak to her alone, because it is much more easy to share intimacy. But do not fall in the other extreme. Do not hide from her, because in that case, as you tell me that there has not been anything unclean in your relationship, it can happen that she still is in your mind in a more subtle way, in a covert way, or even like a platonic way. It is more mature for you to put in front of her and to be able to treat her. It will help you a lot in the future, because 70% of your people, if you become a pastor, will be women. So it is important to you to know your feelings and to be able to deal with them. And also don't worry very much about that getting in love, because according to psychology, getting in love lasts for between 6 and 18 months. It is like being enlightened at the point that you cannot see more than that person that you are in love of. Even you cannot see her defects. But little by little, that shine will decrease, and you will be able to see that she has also her defects and so on, and then you will be more objective. He did, and now he's a very good priest. I only put an exception for that. That is when some boundaries have been trespassed, when there has been physical contact. Unfortunately, I have had to deal with some priests that entered into physical relationships with women, and then in a very unrealistic way, a little naive, they said, no, I want to keep the relationship with her in order. I think that we can be friends as we were before having this relationship. I usually recommend them. In my experience, it is perhaps not impossible, but very hard, because when you have seen a person in this way, as a wife, in a erotized, in a sexualized context, it is very difficult for you not to see her, perhaps not all the time, but sooner or later you will have a blue moment in which you will need somebody to help you, somebody who loves you and so. And when you have eaten the forbidden apple, it is very difficult for you, if you have the apple in front of you, not to bite it anymore. It is like one of the consequences of the experiment of the marshmallow that we have seen, is that there is a great difference between the first time one child beats the marshmallow and the second, third, fourth time. The person who have never beat the marshmallow is more likely not to beat it at all. The one who has beaten for a first time is very much likely that he will beat for the second, third, fourth, and so on. So last slide, and we will do the break. St. John Paul II recommends us that a correct, in-depth awareness of the nature and mission of the ministerial priesthood is the path which must be taken in order to emerge from the crisis of priestly identity. Here we are in Pastore Dabobovi, so 1992, if I am not wrong. I am not going to speak specifically about the ministry of the priesthood, about the nature, about the mission, but about more psychological issues. But remember that this, what I am going to speak, is only my experience, so you can also challenge it in the questions, and that there is also a theological important basement that must be known. So what does this camel mean? This camel means the two crises of vocation. There are two moments in which vocation, every vocation, is in more danger, and in the practice it means that those are the moments in which more people abandon their vocation. Any kind of vocation, marriage vocation, priest vocation, vocation to consecrated life, or to other kind of Christian vocations. Those moments are the first 5 years and the middle age, by the 40s, the crisis of the 40s. Obviously you have people who leave the ministry in other moments, but there is a kind of concentration in those two moments. So we're going to study both of them. And putting it in relationship what we have spoken in the previous talk, we're going to put in relationship that first period of crisis, the period of crisis in the first 5 years, as the adolescence and young adult. Because in such a way we can see the initial formation as a childhood in the vocation. Because when you receive people in the seminaries, they feel, even if they are young adults, and they have already studied in college, but they are in some way as children, saying, I want to follow this vocation, I don't know what a priest is, I want you to show me, you that know, teach me what I have to do. So it is many times a very passive approach that is not correct. And that people who work in the seminary know well that there is a risk in priestly formation, that is treating seminarians as children. It is very easy because you have the power. You have the power to say you have to leave the seminary or you want to be ordained. Behave well, do what I want, and then be a good child. And I think that it is not so difficult to get good seminarians. The problem is getting good priests, making people to live as good priests even if they are seminarians. For example, it is very easy to get that seminarians go to the morning prayer every day, do their tasks, speak to the spiritual director. If they don't do that, they will receive a correction, and if they persevere, they will be aparted. So, even both if they agree or they don't agree with that, they will do. But the challenging point is when they arrive to their first destiny, to their first parish, and in that moment they have to make their own plan of life. They have to choose how long they are going to pray, where and when they are going to pray. They have to choose a spiritual director. And if they only have been forced, not directly them, but by the structure, by the system, to do those things, and they have not reflected on how important it is for their life, and more of that, they have experienced how much important and useful it is for them to pray and to have a spiritual director. If they had not done that experience, but it was only a formalistic and non-internalized duty that they had, obviously they will abandon that when they become a priest. But also we can say that they have to suffer, or they have to experience a kind of adolescent crisis between the moment in which they are children, passive, good kids, and the moment in which they are mature and adult priests. So that adolescence is similar to the period of adolescence in biological life. Adolescence begins when the good child accepts that he has been given an identity by the parents. The parents have told them, you have to be this, a good kid, a good student, a supporter of my football team, and so on. But at a certain point he puts it in crisis, and he says, I don't want anymore to be what you, dad, are telling me that I have to do. I want to be myself. I have to build my identity. That is why adolescence is so defiant, because one of the ways of being myself is saying, I don't want to be you, so let me act. Depending on how much he acknowledges as part of himself what he has received in the family, he will put it in crisis or not. As example, many adolescents put in crisis the faith that they have received by their parents. Perhaps because it is something that the parents have told them, you have to do this, and they have not reflected that this is my faith. So when they have to build their identity, they put the cat out also the religion. Many adolescent crises in religion have the problem in the way in which this kid has been grown, has been explained religion. If it has been something very external. It is the difference between a stick and a tattoo. A stick is something that you put in your skin. It can last for more or less time, but sooner or later it will fall. A tattoo is something that has been absorbed in the skin. It's part of me, and even as we see in the sport players, that they have that tattoo for the rest of their lives, even if they would not have it anymore. So it is put in crisis, and then he has to choose. He has to say, I like this or I don't like this. And then it is internalized, it is made a part of his personal life, and finally he discovers, even if I have chosen that, I have to build it. So I think that it can happen also in a more or less clear way, in a more or less violent way, in order to construct your identity, your vocational identity. You receive a lot of information, but at a certain point, the seminarian, I hope that it is the seminarian and not the priest, has to say, among all this information that I have received, I want to catch this, and I don't want to catch this other thing. This manifestation of piety, this way of living ministry. Obviously, there is an objective block that has to be accepted. It is better that they pass the adolescent crisis in the seminary because you can discern. I think that you have taken out things that are part of priesthood identity. You can't renounce of that. If you want to renounce of that, you have also to renounce to ordination. The problem is the person who passes through adolescent crisis when they are already in. And in fact, the worst violent crisis, a vocational crisis that I have found is where the person has behaved as a good kid in initial formation in his first years of ministry and arrives at the middle age crisis and passes this adolescent crisis, because then it is a chaos. It is very deep and it is very difficult to overcome. This James Marshall says that the phases of adolescent crisis, he synthesizes what I have just said, has two phases. One is the denial of the previous, the second one is exploration of the existing alternatives, third one, the choice, the affirmation, and then the commitment to build what he has chosen. And so he speaks about four kinds of identity. The first one is the one who has a great commitment but has not done a work of exploration, has not done that work of choosing himself, of looking for doing a research and an internalization. So that is the voluntaristic. That is the one who only follows rules. That is the modern Pelagianism that Pope Francis has criticized so many times. And then, as he does not a clear identity, has to follow external signs. And that is in the Roseaire person that in the way of the clothes that he wears, or in the liturgy, or in the securities in the doctrine and so on, are very, very little flexible. Because when they have to challenge something, they have to think, they have to discern, they have to adapt to the person, the real person that they have in front, they are not secure. So the opposite would be the moratorium, the one who is exploring all the time but does not choose anything. There is not a commitment. The person, I have found some of them who goes to a movement, to a parish, and then to another, and then another, and then another, and years are passing, and he does not a commitment with a way of life. He does not know what to do with his life, only he explores here and there. The third one,
would that be like St. Augustine in his early years be an example of like that?
Yes, in fact, that is. When he wanted, he followed practically all the currents in philosophy, the Manichaees, and then the third one would be the diffusion of identity. The one who does not explore and does not make any commitment. He's like floating into the ether without a clear direction, a clear address, what I want to do with my life. I only survive in the life. And finally, we find the identity archived. That is the person who has done an exploration and a commitment. He has really looked what I want to do with my life, not what you want to do, not how you want me to do it, but I am going to take my own decisions and then I'm going to follow them. Then here, some people say, hey, I went to the seminary very young, and they didn't look for other alternatives. So should I stop my formation and go here or there, and go out with girls, and go to other spiritualities, and go to a Protestant church, and then when I have explored all of that, then I will be free to go to the seminary. Thanks God, that is not my message. Because Marcia, not me, does not say many explorations. He says high exploration. Go in depth, think, reflect, challenge what you are saying. And if you don't understand something, ask. And to the formators, don't feel that if a young man is asking you the whys of why you have to get up so early to pray? Wouldn't it be easier for us to go to Mass in the afternoon and then we save 45 minutes of sleep? Or why the church is so rigid about the sex commandment? Now in our society, in which our seminarians have a clearly high social cultural level, they think more than 4 years ago. And perhaps they ask themselves questions that we didn't. And now authority is in crisis. So, 4 years ago probably, as you said, this is that because the church has shown us. And the people say, okay, I trust the church, so now they say, but why does the church forbid or permit or make it obligatory? It is part of our society, and we cannot ask the people in our seminaries or houses of formation to renounce to that background that is part of their identity. And so we will have to be more ready to give answers to their questions. I like very much an example that I heard once, speaking mainly with young seminarians that perhaps can have a kind of complex or inferiority because they can see I went to the minor seminary or I entered directly to the seminary and they are living with other people that have lived a richer life because they have romantic experiences, they went to college, they worked for a few years, and I feel myself little without experience part. So should I explore? I say, what do we want? But remember who was the beloved disciple of Jesus. It was St. John, that has been acknowledged by tradition as the adolescent disciple of Christ, as the youngest disciple of Christ, as the one that, contrary to Peter, has not been married, but gave Jesus his complete, pure, and innocent heart. It can be you. So, if you want to give your heart completely without experience to Christ, know that perhaps he can also call you to be his beloved disciple. So just offer him that check without an amount, that blank check, and give Jesus also all the amount that you will find during your years. Also, it means that you will find sooner or later what you have renounced and you didn't know. When you go to a seminary and you are only 18 years old, you don't know how difficult it will be for you to have a nice car and your friends, your brothers, and the people who study with you, when they arrive to your age, they will have great holidays in Miami Beach, they will have a BMW, they will have a Tesla because they are earning money, and you are not going to drive it unless you are very lucky with the car that you rent. So it will mean that little by little God will be filling that check, and then you will realize if you have constructed an identity and a hierarchy, you will be able to put all those issues that you discover little by little in its place. And so you will suffer, of course, but it will help you to offer more things to God. The sooner or the later, all of us, the one who entered the seminary 35 years old and the one who entered 18 years old, will know how attractive, appealing is a family, a car, holidays, wealthy, and all that stuff. One discovers it suddenly when he lives in the seminary, the other little by little. So let's speak about the crisis that we find in the priesthood life. Crisis in the sense that we have spoken about as moments in which I have to adapt my life and my knowledge and my interior life to new characteristics. The life cycle is said to be, by the experts, by the psychologists, something constant that always goes forward, progressive, irreversible. Whenever you have overcome a crisis, you have the instruments, and if you go to overcome it in a healthy way, this crisis won't be present in front of you anymore. The adolescent crisis presents in front of you only once. So if you overcome that, you can be happy. You will receive instead other crises, and all those crises are necessary. So as to be an adult, healthy man, you have to overcome all those crises. Otherwise, you will have a great hole in the middle of your panel of instruments, and you will need that instrument. So we are going to speak about 4 crises. 2 of them are physiological or normal or normative crises, in the sense that everybody has to overcome those crises, and 2 of them are pathological crises, which means that something went wrong. So if you don't do that wrong thing, you're going to have to be in front of that crisis. Let us begin with the first crisis, which is very well represented in this book, Crisis of Faith, Crisis of Love, by Thomas Keating. He speaks at the beginning of the book about the apparition of Jesus to the disciples after the resurrection, which are somewhat strange, because the disciples don't acknowledge Jesus, are not able to realize that it is him, and even if they realize, the relationship is a little strange, like we read at the end of St. John. We read it yesterday in the Gospel, when Jesus helps them to do the second miracle, fishing, and they receive them at in the sun, and the disciples didn't ask Jesus who he were, because they knew that it was Jesus, which is paradoxal. If you know that it is Jesus, you don't need to ask him why. So it was something strange in him that they didn't know how to treat him. So he says, this Keating, that at a certain point in the spiritual maturation, Jesus asked us to adapt to a new relationship with him, because he changes and we change. Mainly we change. We don't have the same relationship with our friends, with our family, biological family, or with the people, than the relationship that we had to them when we were in our 20s. Now probably it is more calm, more serene, we don't laugh so much or so high, it is more serene. In the same way, the relationship with Christ, with Jesus, with God the Father, also changes. And it would be naive to try and have the same style of prayer now when we are adults, younger or adult or older adults, than when we were at the beginning of our vocation. That means that the prayer has to grow, has to change, has to be simplified, as the classic author says. And at St. John of the Cross, in Frame of Living Love, explains how hard it was for him to have a spiritual director that insisted him do meditative prayer, dialogue in your prayer. And he said, but now I have to be more free. Now what God is asking from me is a more contemplative prayer, a prayer more free from words. That is the text that explained very well Tanqueray in his famous treatise of ascetic and mystic, and also Garrigou Lagrange and the 3 stages of interior life, or Roger Marie, that we spoke about that the other day. So the relationship with God changes. The problem is that since it happens without warning, few people are aware of it. when it happens to them. It happens little by little, but slowly but surely. So the problem here can be that as the prayer that I know how to do is not useful anymore. I have to discover other paths of prayer. We will speak about some books that can help us at the end of the talk, but no one can tell me a path. I have to explore again. That's why this lexical instrument, the capacity of searching, is very useful along all our life. So it can be a moment when I found that difficulty in my life of prayer, in my relationship with Christ, to read, to explore other ways of doing my prayer. But it can happen also that as prayer is hard for me, I don't pray anymore. I don't devote time to pray in the chapel, or I do other things during my mental prayer. For example, I read. For example, I check my cell phone. For example, I organize my homilies, my catechesis, and so, but there is not a real prayer. So as long as this first crisis is physiologic, in the sense that, according to Thomas Keating, everybody has to feel his faith challenged, the other crisis, the neglective prayer, only happen to those who fall into that error. Another thing about, and then I finish this first crisis, is that usually Christ also going to purify our motivation. That means that in our motivation for entering into priesthood, in our vocation, there were a lot of human reasons also. That we liked the priesthood life, that there was somebody who took us to the priesthood with his words, his samples, and so, that we had a legitimate human motivation to help the people, to see the people grow, to change the world, and God can cut all these human motivations. And the nice, peaceful style of life that we liked, now we find that it is hard, that the person who led me to my vocation perhaps is dead or left the ministry, that the apostolic work is hard for me, or people do not answer anymore, and so God is telling me, taking me those securities, those human motivations. Were you looking for me, or looking for those human motivations? So it is a way of purifying our vocation and our motivation. But it can only be thus if you look at them from a supernatural point of view. If you only look at them from a human point of view, it will be a burden. Let's go to the second one. Here you find the link to the text, because I have uploaded all these texts. It is a classic that Pope Francis has recommended to the priest to read. It is only like 6 pages, more or less. And it is a classic text by René Voison, who is a French founder of a leader community based on the spirituality of Blessed Charles de Foucault. And he founded it, I think, in the 50s or 60s. And after a few years, he wrote this letter. It is like opening his conscience to his brothers. And he says, the risk of duration for us, as for every human enterprise, is that of a certain wear and tear of the ideal pursuit and of the effort made to realize it. A wear and tear that would lead us to be content with mediocrity in holiness. That is the challenge, the lukewarm. The saying, it is very difficult, it would be very nice, but it is impossible in the practice. As you know, recently Pope Leo, during the Jubilee for the Families, has said matrimony is not an ideal, it is a reality. It is real that we have to go little by little, that perhaps we don't arrive to it completely, but it is not an idea that we will only get in heaven, but now it is impossible. No, it is possible with the grace of God. And mediocrity is not compatible with holiness. The dicastery for the clergy recently changed its name. It is not anymore the congregation for the clergy, but dicastery. But what has not been changed is the condition for a process of beatification and canonization. The heroic living of the virtues is still necessary. So not mediocrity, but heroicity. We can read a text that can be an example of this necessity to or this risk of mediocrity, and it will be the letter that a priest wrote to this nun. It is the founder of a newer community in Spain that is called Jesu Comunio. I have uploaded it also because it is very beautiful. We are only going to read one of the 12 pages of this text, and I think that this letter of the priest can be, we can identify ourselves with this priest, that after at the beginning of his vocation with a great good desire of being holy, he has been eaten by activities, by difficulties and so, and now he finds himself in a great problem. If you want to read, you will read probably much better than me. Come to this side because here we have the plug. Okay. No,
it goes to be proven.
Come here better because the camera will.
All right.
You're gonna be on YouTube.
From where to where? Remind me, please.
Perfect. Here, from here to the end of the next page.
Okay.
You can put it bigger if you want, or even it can be easier. Here you go. Mother.
So this is a letter to.
Begin directly by the letter Mother. Mother the other day. Oops.
But from whom to Mother?
It is from a young priest
to
this religious woman.
Mother, the other day I left your house scorched by the image of firefighters racing with sirens, blazing to extinguish fire, only to realize that they have not a drop of water in their tanks. What good is it to rush to help others if we ourselves are dry, empty of prayer, forgetful of the Holy Spirit? Your words struck like fire to the heart. Sometimes we worry so much about others' thirst that we forget our own. I must face my truth. Everything feels disoriented, even my life. I once thought it was like a strong tower, but now it is besieged by a host of doubts, and weakness overtakes me. A few days ago I entered the church and felt a strangeness, a great emptiness, the absence of his presence. The beauty and sweetness of his house no longer moved me. A deep sadness made me cry out, "How did I get here?" As St. Augustine wrote, "Wanting, I arrived at a place I did not want. Leaning on myself, I lacked stability." I cannot doubt my call. I was filled with joy when I was ordained. The person of Jesus Christ broke into my life and captivated me. The priesthood seemed to me an inestimable gift. I would give anything to feel again the trembling of my hands at the mystery of consecration. And yet now, soon after ordination, I was entrusted with responsibilities. I was recognized. I had the support of my bishop, and I admit it, I liked that. I felt seen, valued, but everything quickly became overwhelming. I was swept into a whirlwind of obligations, parish life, families, the sick, the poor, youth ministry, pilgrimages, camp retreats, diocesan meetings. I made the mission the center of my life. I wanted to respond, to please everyone. Too concerned with meeting the standard, comparing myself to admired priests and trying to imitate them. I evaluated my life and that of my brother priests by our accomplishments. But what good is it to be admired and sought after if I carry within me a great emptiness? Sometimes I fall into a kind of victimhood. I'm always the one giving, the one expected to have answers. I find myself avoiding difficulties, dodging parishioners so that they don't find me in the office. Sometimes I don't answer calls under the excuse of being with someone. Other times I dash away pretending I got a call. I live life at a dizzying speed. Many days I celebrate the Eucharist like an automaton, rushed, thinking ahead of the next week. I pray the liturgy hours in a hurry, often out of time. I turn moments of prayer into reading spiritual or theological books. I put off confession. I struggle to be available for spiritual direction because I am so insecure. My life revolves around wanting to heal others, but I am the one who needs healing. I feel alone amidst crowds asking for their shepherd. I try to ease my loneliness at the computer, responding to emails, dealing with documents, and sometimes seeking escapes that only consume me more. Is this what I became a priest for? I know it is not. I think I took God's love for granted and let it grow cold. I am faithful to his things, but I am not with him.
Thank you. So probably we can find ourselves identified, speaking about identity, more or less with this letter and with the difficulties and the challenges that these priests have. In this PDF that I have uploaded, she also gives some answers, and I have used sometimes from my personal prayer, and I think it is a good test that can help you also. Here you can find also the original conference in YouTube. So, so let us go to the third crisis that we are going to deal here in this talk, which is the crisis of the Middle Age, the crisis of the 40 years. The second curve of difficulties, of challenges, of crises in vocation. Remember, in all kinds of vocation. Also marriages broken for the second time, for the second peak, also in the 40s. Which is, we remember that phrase of Saint Josemaria when he said that in the middle life crisis, when people reach the age of 40, married people want to get married not to let the marriage. Friars want to become priests, doctors want to become lawyers, lawyers want to become engineers, and everything like that. It's like a spiritual hecatomb. It is not by himself, as his experience, it was like what a religious man who was doing a retreat with our father taught him. So what is the problem in the 40s? That is the calling of the initial enthusiasm, and it is completely physiologic. The age of the 20s and even the 30s is the age of a naive enthusiasm, and I am going to be the leader of the community, I'm going to help people to conversion and so, but all this emotion usually comes. And then also comes what Romano Guardini calls the crisis of the experience of limits, which is when years pass and you see that you are not going so far because you don't have enough social skills, easiness to speak, answers, mental strength, physical strength, and so. So the ideas that you have were unrealistic. But also, Guardini says, not only your own limits, but also the limits of other people around you won't permit you to go so long. Because your superiors, because your bishop, because entrusted you some work that you knew it is not the work that I am going to do best. No, trust me and go. Okay, I will trust you, and then I clash. Or I asked to do studies because I thought that it was good for me to do a deeper formation, but no, there is so much pastoral necessity, so please stay in the parish for a couple of years and then change the bishop, and the bishop said, no, I didn't have any commitment with you, so stay as a pastor for the rest of your life, and then you are working perhaps in what you don't like so much, and your possible, let's call career or whatever, won't be, or people who really didn't behave well with you. And then we arrive to the psychological wounds. Not one abused you, but you have suffered because of the limits of other people. So there is also an accumulation of wounds. There can be also a disattachment, disenchantment with pastoral work because you realize that it is hard, that you have baptized a lot of people, but not many of them persevere in Christian life, that you have given hundreds, thousands of first communions, but not all of them are persevering in Christian life, that you have done a lot of marriages, and many of them are broken. So at a certain point, you can fall into the cynicism of saying, why do you want to marry you if you have a 50% the possibilities that your marriage fail and is broken and of divorce? And it is a question that consciously or unconsciously perhaps you will do yourself in front of a couple of fiancés that is asking you to marry them. There can be so a kind of disenchantment with the vocation or with the idealized vocation. And here is another challenge for us priests, that we need tolerance to frustration. We will deepen tomorrow when we will speak about the burnout, but a priest has to do an agreement with the Lord and a resolution that is, I am going to do well independently of how people will answer to me, how people will respond. And I will be happy seeing and also realizing with my faith that no Hail Mary that I pray will be wasted. God will put it whenever He wants, and perhaps I have to renounce even to see the fruits, the legitimate fruits of what I have seeded. Also to know that this is our condition, the human condition, that we don't live in Wonderland or in Disney World, that is a world with difficulties, both for priestly life, for celibacy, but also for marriage life. There can be a neglect of inner life, interior life, as we have seen in this letter by the priest. There can be also the appearance of physical ailments, of physical illnesses that make you also feel your body as a kind of enemy. In the 20s and the 30s, you have all the physical strength. At a certain point, you begin to have physical problems with which you also have to live. There is also that sixth trait or sixth emotion that we have spoken in the first talk, the novelty seeking or surprise or anxiety, that makes you to feel the routine more burdensome. There are people who are very stable and are happy with the same job for a long time. Other people feel tired, carrying with the same work, with all the condition of a yearly repetitive work. Every year, when you live in a parish, you have to do more or less the same things, and you receive the same courses and the same schedule also. And for some people, it can be also burdensome. So it is good to do according to the duties that you have, to look for something new in your vocation that helps you to flourish your talents. For some people, it can be to do some studies, or to write, or to do a course of something in such a way that you do something new, or at least that you don't repeat the same program. I, as a university professor, have also the experience. When I arrive to the first year, one of the years in which I have to teach the same course, I entered into crisis, because it was so boring to repeat the same course, to read the same notes that I have, to hear the same answers, and to read the same wrong answers in the exams, even if I knew that it is a difficult question. So I'm sure that I explained it well, and I said, don't answer me this, you did. Okay, it is also frustrating. And you have to know that, and well, you have to accept and you have to try and change as long as you can. You have to adapt everything to this new phase of the life cycle, which means that you have to do a sport, but perhaps you cannot play any more football or soccer or basketball because you are old and perhaps a little weighty, and perhaps you don't have the same resistance, but you need to do physical exercise according to your condition. And perhaps this is the most important point, which is the feeling of now or never. When you're 40, you can look for a new job, you can look for a new romantic relationship. When you are in your 50s, it is much more difficult. So people who arrive in their 40s can say, if I am not happy with my lifestyle now, if I don't change it now, I will have to suffer it for the rest of my life. As I hear to a young priest, he told me, look, I don't have any doubt that I have vocation, but I cannot bear anymore my lifestyle now. If they told me you will die in 2 years, I would be happy to persevere in my vocation. The problem is that my life expectancy is 40 or 50 or 50 years, and I'm going to become crazy. I understood that he had this feeling, so the easy answer is I'm going to abandon the ministry. I proposed him to change his lifestyle because he was very rigid, very perfectionistic, and in fact it was making him leaving the ministry very hard and very unhealthy. So we proposed him to take care of his flesh, to put some limits to the demands that the people but himself were putting to him, and thanks God about 5 years have passed and he's still a happy priest. So you can change not the core of your vocation, but a lot of things around your vocation that can make you happy living your vocation. And finally, we find the burnout. It is a pathological crisis. But I am not going to speak now, not because we are arriving at the end of the talk, but because we will have tomorrow's talk only about the burnout. It is pathologic because not everybody has to pass through a burnout. So some general ideas. How can we go through those crises? How can we overcome them? The starting point, according to many authors that I have read, is going back to the love that God has for me. Because the easy answer is I have to pray more, I have to behave better. Go a step backwards and say, God loves me. He loves me independently of how I behave. And I like very much this verse of the Adeste Fideles, in that we sing in Christmas, sic nos amantem quis non redamarit. To that loves us so much, who would not re-love him? Who would not love him back? So, loving God is not a duty. It is something that surges spontaneously in a person who feels love. So, the more you deepen in God's love for you, the more you will automatically feel love to love Him and so to behave well.
You know, there's a movie called If I Cannot Imagine. You know, this Christian singer, very interesting story. It's a real story. I cannot imagine. It's a movie. There's a song, popular Christian.
Okay.
Christian consolation.
Thank you. So that can be the starting point, because it is not voluntaristic, or the contrary. It is that sense of freedom of love, as the Father has spoken us from the beginning of his as a leader after his election. Pope John Paul II, in a very nice speech to priests and consecrated people, speaks about the crisis of identity, of priesthood identity, that was very alive at the beginning of his pontificate. This speech is in the 1980, and he says, "Who am I? Identity. What is required of me? What is my identity?" This is the anguished question most frequently asked today, certainly exposed to the counter-attack of the crisis of transformation that is shaking the world. Certainly, we will not find our answer in the science of human behavior, in psychology, in what I am speaking now, or in social religious statistics, but we will find it in Christ and in faith. We will humbly question the Divine Master and ask Him who we are, how He wants us to be, what is before Him our identity. So, life of prayer, necessarily. Go to Christ, go to our prayer and ask Him, what do you want with me? And what do you want that I do as a response to that? Not to be passive. I like very much the omnium bonum, everything is for the good of the people who love God, but I prefer to put ourselves as active players of this omnia in bonum. It is real that everything can be for the best of us, but usually God wants you to be one of the builders of that good. So in every crisis that you find, think, how can I put in action my talents? What do I have to adapt, to change in my life so that I can live a joyful ministry and I have put in action my virtues, supernatural virtues and human virtues, and my human talents so as to fill happily my ministry. One idea that helps is this by St. Paul to the Philippians: "He who began a good work in you will carry it on until the day of Christ Jesus." So what did motivate me to enter into priesthood? What were my ideas, my emotions, So go to them, and as also Pope Francis has said a lot of time, do a grateful memory. Remember how much you have received in the ministry. Remember your moments of happiness, and think that you cannot revive them because now you are the same but a different person. But go and find those things that make you live more happy. To return to Galilee. An idea when I read this book by Jordan Peterson, the 12 Rules for Life, I read this piece and I found faces of priests that I have known. He said in the second rule, sacrificing ourselves for God, or if you will, for the greater good, does not mean suffering silently and willingly when a person or an organization, the church, the diocese, permanently demands more from us than they offer us. This is one of the causes of burnout. I am giving myself so much to the diocese, to the people, and I don't receive from them. Perhaps stop and reflect on how much you have received, how much you have wrong from a human and a supernatural point of view. It is very difficult to live it for the people who have renounced to their humanity to become a priest. So that's why all those other components of our identity can support us also to persevere. Because some people, when you say that, they say, I have grown a lot of soft skills. When I went to seminary, I was very insecure, and it was difficult for me to lead people. Now I have become a small CEO of a small business, which is my church, my parish, and I am a community leader. So I have developed a lot of capacity thanks to my vocation. And second, remember that your boss is not the bishop, neither the Pope. It is God. So the person that you have to answer, that is demanding you, is God. And think on that when you have the feeling that your boss or your people are not treating you well, or that think that God is judging you and God is taking the accountability of your good actions. We are about to finish. When I read this piece of Deus Caritas Est by Benedict XVI, I was a little shocked. He says, man cannot live only by oblative descending love alone. We cannot only live by giving ourselves to God or to the people. We need also horizontal love. We need a community that supports us. We need friendship. We have spoken about this article that I recommend again to read by Maurizio Fagioni, The Value of Friendship in Celibate Life, that I have uploaded a lot of papers, but if I had to recommend only one, it could be this one, of friendship and celibate. So look also for good relationships that can help you to live a vocation in which you are part of a family, of a community. So again, Saint John Paul II, our blissful life and activity continue the life and activity of Christ Himself. Here lies our identity, our true dignity, the source of our joy, the very basis of our life, identification of Christ. And Christ has also His friends, and Christ has also His moments of loneliness, of abandonment, but He could say in the Last Supper, you will abandon me, but you will let me alone, but I am never alone, because the Father is with me. And this is a very important idea for the people who live in celibacy. Some bibliography that can help: this book, Broken God, by Gregory Poshka, who is not a priest, not a bishop, he's a lay man, psychologist, father of family, but has written this book, very nice. It is one of the best books that I have read about psychology and spirituality. He says that all of us are broken gods, taking the psalm that Jesus uses also in front of the Pharisees. I told you, you are gods. And he says, we are gods because we have been created at the image of God. So we all have 7 great desires in our heart that are these ones. And the 7 capital sins are a short-term response to these necessities that we have. And so he says, when you are struggling with one of these capital sins, go further, go deeper, and say, what is the great necessity that I am looking for? Abundance, dignity, justice, peace, trust, welfare, or communion. And then give the right answer. That is a long-term answer. If you only give the short-term answer, you won't be ever satisfied, or you will be satisfied at the short term. The easiest way is luxury, is internet, is all that stuff that can make you still for a little while, but after that you will still feel alone, worse than before. Another couple books, and with this I will finish. Thirsting for Prayer by Jacques Philippe. It is not a book written for beginners. It is a book written for people who have already a spiritual life, but a little exhausted, but need some novelty, a renewal of their spiritual life. And of course, by Henry Nouwen, The Return of the Prodigal Son. I loved this book when I read that, because it is from his own experience, from his own life, when he was a young priest, very proud of himself, and I'm not doing a spoiler, it is the beginning of the book. And one friend of him says, hey, you are superb, but you are a sinner. You have to be the prodigal son. And he humbles himself, and he kneels down, and he's put in front of God. But then a second friend tells him, hey, you are very humble, you seem very humble, but you are very judgmental. You are doing comparisons. They are contrasting all the time with the people, and you say, I don't do great things, the people do, so you despise them. You are the older brother of the parable, so you are superb and you have to renounce to that role. And then he works on himself for a while, and he tries to love the people without defects, to pray for the people so that they are converted and so. And that second one, a third friend, does him the final answer. He says, you are not, don't think anymore on yourself. You have to be the penitent second son, or the humble second, the not superb second one. You have to be the father. You have to change your position in the picture by Rembrandt. And that spiritual fatherhood is a not-ending font of enrichment for everybody who is serving other people, but mainly for the people who live in celibacy, because it is an answer to the necessity of generativity that all of us have. So thank you very much. As I told you, you will find a written paper in this link, and here is also the YouTube channel in which I hope to upload these talks. And we'll let the third crisis, pathological crisis, the burnout, for tomorrow. Perhaps it is the time. Yeah.
I probably misunderstood you, but you made the statement, it's not a duty to love God, and I know we should not love God out of the sense, like we shouldn't love or marry our wife out of the sense, so it's my duty to do it. But, you know, it is a duty to love God.
Sure,
And,
yes.
So.
Absolutely, yes. But if you love God only out of duty, if you pray only out of duty, if you celebrate Mass every day only out of duty, it will be exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
You have also to integrate those duties in something that is good for you, because God commands it to you because it is good for you, not for Him. We pray and we read a lot of times during Lent time the prophets and the Psalms in which God tells us, I don't care of your sacrifices and your holocaust and so. He only wants our love because it is good for us to love Him.
I've heard from bishops and dioceses that those first 5 years is where they're experiencing many priests, or a greater number of priests that are in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think now those first 5 years are more difficult, it seems, than they were in the past?
There are a lot of reasons. First of all, because people are more immature for accessing to priesthood, but also to marriage. And then because now, as you have less priests, you don't have so many possibilities to tell the young priest, go to this older priest that I trust him, be with him during the first 5 years, and then you can learn, you won't have deep responsibilities, and you will live in the company of other person, you won't be live alone. Now, because of the lack of priests, at least in Europe, we find that after sometimes just when they receive the ordination, they have to be pastors. And then their work changes radically.
Yeah.
They live with a community. They are absolutely tired of community life. But the radical change to go to live alone, to have to organize themselves, to have to manage their just gained autonomy, well, as I said, to make your plan right, to be free to wake up in the morning earlier or later, to go to bed in the night earlier or later, and all the responsibilities of managing the church. So for many of them it is very challenging, and also perhaps it is something that they are not really prepared, because they're very prepared to celebrate sacraments, but they are not so prepared to all the material business that we have. And when they realize I am manager of economics, of organization of events, or leading community, but it is not the priesthood that I was supposed to do. And it is very difficult to train them in that. They can spend some time in a parish, but as they won't have the responsibility, it will be very difficult for them to realize really how burdensome it is to take responsibilities, to organize activities and so on.
Thanks, Kiko.
Thank you very much.